Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.
From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
In August of this year, the president laid out his vision for a tax cut that would be a middle-class miracle. And that's exactly what the Congress passed today.
Something this big, something this generational, something this profound could not have been done without exquisite presidential leadership.
Come February, check your check, because that will be the pay raise of the vote for Donald Trump.
High praise and lofty claims for historic legislation. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the impact of tax reform. Joining us to talk more about it is Joe Elsasser. Joe is a certified financial planner whose credits include creating Social Security timing and tax clarity and acquiring Smart Risk. Joe, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I want to start with taxes, right? It can be overwhelming, just the whole mere thought of it to people. So what would you say to get us all into the mindset of this discussion?
To start, I would say big picture is smile, because the vast majority of people are going to pay less in 2018 than they paid in 2017 on exactly the same income. For most people, the process of filing their return will actually be simpler. One of the big changes is that far fewer people will itemize under the new rules. Roughly half of the folks that would have itemized under the old rules. So simplicity, although we're not going to get to a postcard, I mean, it sure would have been nice, right? We're not going to get there, not even close. Yet there is still considerably more simplicity than there was before for the average American. Now, there are some complexities, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Okay, I'm listening. So I think that was very, very well done. So Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. Break it down for us in a nutshell, because it, like so much, had a lot going on with it, right? So whittle it down for us.
Big picture, there were two sides to the reform. The first side was the corporate reform, and what everybody talks about with the corporate reform is the spillover effect that will happen. And we're starting to see some of that. You see larger companies doing pay raises or larger charitable programs or things of that nature. What we'll really talk about today is the personal side, so the second side. What happened to the personal income tax as a result of the reform? And on that side, the reforms probably aren't as significant as they were on the corporate side, and yet they're still the biggest reforms to happen in 30 plus years.
Yeah, talk about that historical impact. I mean, when did this happen, before, and why is this different, Joe?
Well, the biggest, we get tweaks all the time, right? Tweaks in terms of small tax rules, popcorn taxes, if you will, targeted tax changes designed to pay for this or for that. It's literally a once a generation thing to try to address the whole tax code at once, because inevitably that requires so much effort in Congress. You saw all the negotiations that had to happen in order for a bill to get finalized, and so many of them we read about being really last second. Some of that is just simply unavoidable. It's a huge tax code. And so to try to simplify it and achieve any sort of simplification is a win. And as we'll see later on, for most people, for the vast majority of people, it's a pretty significant win.
Okay, thank you. I think this would be a good time for us to talk a little bit about your background. How did you get into all of this, Joe, and how do you know so much?
Sure. Well, I'm a certified financial planner, so long story short, I work with individual clients in our financial planning practice to help them make retirement decisions. That said, about 7 years ago, we dove real deep into the Social Security decision, and when you spend a lot of time with Social Security, you inevitably spill over into tax because it gets really unique tax treatment, which, by the way, didn't change under the new rules. And so ended up building a software company called Covisum. first product that's used by 20,000 plus advisors around the country was Social Security Timing and Tax Clarity is a tool that we launched a couple of years ago to help people identify the interactions between different kinds of income. Because often it's not the bracket that matters, it's how much do I actually lose to federal income tax or gain by taking some action. And that's what Tax Clarity really helps people, advisors, and then in turn their clients identifies the interaction between different kinds of income streams. So we spend a lot of time working on first understanding and then more importantly programming those tax rules.
At what point in your life, Joe, did you wake up and say, this is what you wanted to do and do so passionately for the rest of your life?
Sure. Well, not during the time I was at UNO as a political science major. No, it literally came about because I got involved in the financial planning world and started to see impacts that were not at all aligned with the things that I had learned in the curriculum, in the standard curriculum. And ultimately, when you're paying attention, it's hard to let those things slip. And when there aren't other softwares that handle them, you try to systematize your own way for answering those questions. And ultimately, other advisors like those ways, and that's how a software takes off. And that's kind of what happened with us.
Wow, congratulations. Okay, so lots we could be talking about during this program, but we whittled it down to 10 key issues. We're going to put those up for the viewers right now as we're kind of introducing all of this. We want them to take a look at those 10, because what we're going to do after they see this is talk about each one separately based on what you think is important for Nebraskans to know. So anything you want to say as we're, about halfway through here before we hit each one?
Well, when I mentioned a lot of them represent simplifications, the interesting thing here is out of the top 10 list, these probably aren't the ones that represent simplifications. So we'll kind of go line by line, and I'll point out some of the related things that maybe didn't make the list. The increased standard deduction really does represent a simplification. So you can kind of think of a tax return as option A and option B. Option A is, hey, I don't want to count up all the things that I did through the course of the year and tally them up individually and see if that gets me a bigger deduction than the alternative, which is just to take an assumed amount. And the assumed amount as a deduction would be called a standard deduction. And so that standard deduction went up more than double. So for a married couple in 2018 under the new rules, it's actually $24,000. For a head of household, it's $18,000. For a single person, it's $12,000. And so it used to be, under the old rules, about 28% of the population would itemize their deductions. They'd go through that exercise of counting up all the different kinds of potential deductions, everything from investment management and tax preparation fees, home mortgage interest, state and local income taxes, things of that nature. They'd add them all up and use that because it was larger than the standard deduction. Well, now with this new larger standard deduction, that exercise is going to be irrelevant for about half the people that went through it last year. So only 15% of the population is expected to itemize under the new rules due to that new larger standard deduction.
Well, thank you. Okay, the second one, we'll put that one up.
Sure, and the second one being the capped mortgage interest deduction. And so mortgage interest, and this is one of the number one reasons why folks used to itemize. You'd be able to deduct your mortgage interest. Well, under the new rules, first off, a big change or a pretty significant change is the treatment of home equity lines of credit. They're no longer deductible. Now there is this idea of acquisition debt that is also new. It used to be that you could deduct mortgage interest. Now the mortgage interest is capped at $750,000. Home equity lines of credit are excluded, except to the extent potentially that they represent acquisition debt. And acquisition debt, this is one of those areas that is tax advice. So as a financial advisor, I won't be crossing that line, and neither should your financial advisors be crossing that line. A CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled agent is really the person who is able to tell you, does this particular line of credit represent some improvement to my home that I can count as acquisition debt? Shouldn't be your financial advisor who's telling you that sort of thing. Basically, when it interacts with the return, it's important to seek out qualified tax advice.
Okay. Let's go to state and local deduction.
Sure. The state and local deductions, one of the big things here, Nebraska, we're going to be less impacted, right? We're not one of the ridiculously high tax coastal states, right, where state and local taxes represent a much larger deduction for someone in California with a multi-million-dollar house than they do for someone here in Nebraska where a multi-million-dollar house is a mansion, right? So these are now capped at $10,000. When you take that and you pair it with the mortgage interest deduction, that's one of the biggest reasons that we're not going to see nearly as many people itemize. Is those two things together tend to be some of the biggest itemized deductions that folks have taken in the past.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and put up the next one then.
Now, several itemized deductions eliminated. So the itemized deductions, you think about some of the itemized deductions that were eliminated. I mentioned earlier tax preparation fees and investment management expenses. Those fall under the 2% floor miscellaneous itemized deductions. That whole section of the Schedule A, which is the itemized deductions, is gone. Okay, just all of them are gone. So that's one. It's not a huge change, but it is impactful because it means that we don't have to pay nearly as much attention to them. Some of the other changes, I guess we already mentioned the mortgage interest change, that's an itemized deduction. So those are pretty significant. Alimony. Alimony used to be deductible, no longer deductible.
Okay, thank you. Next, pass-through income.
This is the big one. So I'm sure that there are a lot of folks with pass-through income, and this was an entirely new code section. You'll hear it called Section 199A or 199 Cap A is what it's being called. And the idea here was to equalize small business tax reform with corporate tax reform. That was the idea here. Okay. And so there's now a whole new set of terminology. A STOB, basically it's a named trader business or a service business that is able to take this 20% deduction on pass-through income, but only up to $315,000 for a married couple of total income. And that's an interesting thing, is that deduction phases out over the next $100,000. So there is going to be an awful lot of both IRS guidance and a whole lot of CPA work for small business owners in determining whether theirs is a specialized, whether they're a service business, specified service business, or they fall under that STOB, or whether there are ways to divide different activities. You take a plumber, for example. A plumber has two parts to their business. One part is the service part of the business, and the other part is the parts part of the business. So there are going to be considerations that folks are going to have to evaluate with their tax advisors. Does it make sense to divide the two parts of the business and actually track that income separately? There's going to be a lot of those discussions that are happening through the course of the year. This is going to be a heavily evolving area under the new rules.
Okay, thank you. Estate tax exemptions?
Basically doubled. So now for only the very wealthy, effectively you've got to have an estate over 11.2 million in order to be concerned about estate taxes. Now this is at the federal level. In Nebraska we have inheritance taxes at the local level, but at the federal level it's really the last estate tax reform brought it up to 5.6 million, actually brought it up to 5 million, and then indexed it forward. This one, doubling it, makes it applicable to, really only the 1%.
Okay. Alternative minimum tax, AMT.
Alternative minimum tax. For anyone who has ever paid alternative minimum tax, or any CPA who's ever messed with alternative minimum tax, which is probably all of them, this was a headache. It was a headache because every year you'd have to wait for Congress to fix it, because in the past the thresholds and phase-outs weren't indexed for inflation. And so it was a pain for that reason. Then it was a pain for the unexpected result. Basically, this is a parallel tax system that runs alongside our normal bracket system. Last year, it applied to roughly 5 million taxpayers. This year, it's expected to apply to less than 200,000. Okay.
Wow.
So alternative, basically what happened was they increased the thresholds where it applies and they increased the phase outs. And what it means is that it applies to far fewer people. It'll be a much less nasty surprise for the public in general.
Wow. Okay. Personal exemptions.
Gone. One word. So it used to be that when you filled out your tax form, right? Actually, when you work, right? When you start your employment, you fill out a W-4. And one of the questions on the W-4 is how many exemptions do you claim? And that's what determines how much the employer withholds from your check. Well, to the extent there are no personal exemptions anymore, that W-4 is going to get interesting. I'm not sure whether it'll disappear and whether it'll just be filing status so they can base your withholdings on whether you're single or married. But personal exemptions, basically for each person that you claim as a dependent in your household, you used to get an amount exempt from income. They did away with that, which roughly the combination of standard deduction plus personal exemptions under the old system roughly mirrors the new higher standard deduction in the new system.
Okay. So the child independent credit then.
Yeah, the child independent credit is the second way. So if you think about it, it used to be, let's say I had a household of 5 under the old rules. I had 3 kids and 2 adults married filing jointly. In the old system, we would have got our standard deduction, and then we would have gotten a personal exemption for each of the 5 people in the household. Well, under the new system, we would get a tax credit. We would only get the one standard deduction of $24,000 for being married filing jointly, but then we'd get a tax credit of $2,000 per child who is under 16 or under, and $500 for dependents that are over age 16. And so when you work these out, even for those households that are not, that we'll say are hurt by the loss of the personal exemption, the child tax credit effectively offsets that new larger child tax credit. So even for those households, they shouldn't feel significant pain. I'll put it that way. I can't say they won't see increases. It's possible they'll see increases just depending on where they fall in the income spectrum. But in general, the two roughly offset.
Wow. Okay. Last but not least, tax brackets.
Tax brackets. This is the one that's going to be totally noticeable because at literally every single level, the tax bracket rate declined. So for example, it used to go, well, I shouldn't say literally every single level because the first level is 10% under the old system and the first level is 10% under the new system.
Okay.
But from there, everything declined. So it used to go 10, 15, then a big jump up to 25, then 28. And now what we have is 10, 12 instead of 15.
Okay.
And then a jump to 22, so you still have a significant jump there. There's going to be a lot of what advisors or CPAs might call bracket management that's going to happen. So it's like if I'm deciding, let's say I'm retired and I'm deciding I've got, my brokerage account that's not in an IRA and I have my IRA account and I'm deciding which account should I draw from. Well, if I'm sitting there and almost all my income falls in the 12% bracket, but this year I got a big expense and I need to take an extra $10,000 out. Well, I probably don't want to take that out of my IRA if most of that withdrawal is going to fall into the 22, right? So the idea of bracket management is when you're in those lower brackets to take as much as you can without stepping into a spot where you get surprised by a higher rate.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to go back. So we've been talking about 10 key issues here. Of all 10 of those, Joe, when it comes to your average Nebraskan, first of all, what may they have the biggest question about? So what might be the most confusing that we should just take a minute or two here just to clarify? And then overall, how is that average Nebraskan going to be impacted?
So I'm gonna bifurcate that. I'm gonna take that in two because
Sure.
small business owners are going to be working with their CPAs really closely this year.
Okay.
Okay, that Section 199 Cap A it's a big deal. It's going to have really varying impacts on different businesses. Ultimately, it's a really good thing. Okay, it's just a matter of, given that it's a really good thing, what are the things that my business in particular should do? And it's important to really go to to a CPA that understands that and is proactive in learning about it and making that a core part of their practice. For individuals, understanding individuals, it really hasn't changed a lot. The biggest things for individuals are understanding the interactions between different kinds of income. In our financial planning practice, we work primarily with people who are setting up retirement income streams. That's primarily what we do. And so the interaction between Social Security income with withdrawals from IRAs or pension income with capital gains in brokerage accounts can produce these really unusual interactions. So for example, somebody who thinks they're in a 12% bracket and they look at their tax return and it says 12%. They would think, hey, if I take an extra $1 out of my IRA, I should lose 12 cents of that, right? But what ends up happening is the interaction between these different income streams can create a what's called an effective marginal rate of almost 50%, where that extra $1, they can actually lose almost 49.95 cents of that dollar to federal income tax because of the interactions. So that really hasn't changed, but the thresholds where you got to watch out for these things happening, those did change. So really it's important for advisors, and advisors around the country are doing this. You've got advisors studying the new rules and understanding how it's applicable to their clients. It's going to be really important for them to understand how those shifts in the brackets impact the actual amounts for their own clients.
I bet that's a process in and of itself. I mean, I know that you're going around and you're talking with planners. What's the general reaction so far? I mean, do people is it catching on and they're able to then apply it to their individual clients? Because of course it's just that one-on-one, everybody's different. Yeah. So what are you finding? Pretty receptive and pretty willing then to, and able to go into?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where strong advisors are, for lack of better word, fiends for knowledge, right? They want to absorb everything they can that might give a client an advantage by virtue of the knowledge and the application of that knowledge they bring to the table, right? And so you've got professional organizations around the country, the Financial Planning Association, Society of Financial Service Professionals. These organizations are doing a great job of helping to educate their members on, which are the typical advisors around the country, on the impact of these changes. It's going to be an ongoing process though. So, you expect evolution in advisors' understanding of this, of any sweeping change, in the same way you'd expect an evolution of CPAs in their world.
Yeah, and you would hope conversations like this might trigger that one person who's been thinking about going to a financial planner but just haven't gotten over that hurdle yet. What would you say to those people? Because oftentimes you'll have that question of, I don't even know where to start. I mean, there's a combination of having so many folks out there, and then you have so much paperwork in your house, and you're trying to figure out how to pull it all together. Give us some tips on how to really get started and what to be looking for coming out of a conversation like this one.
Sure. I'll give you one question first, and one question is, how do you deal with tax in your financial plans? Because the kinds of answers that you'll get from different advisors are going to vary wildly. The kind of answer that you want to hear is, we use specialized tools to model out and project taxes throughout the course of a retirement. We work with other professionals when there are sticky issues that cross the line into tax advice, because that's not the place of the advisor. And ultimately, if they do cross that line, the client isn't able to hold them responsible in the same way they're able to hold a tax professional, a CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled agent responsible for the advice. So that's probably the first question, and the two parts would be specialized tools and relationships with folks who are professionals specifically in the tax area.
And it's okay, Joe, isn't it, for professionals to be working together? I think sometimes you have those people who say, I really like my financial planner, they can do X, Y, and Z, when instead we should be seeking the advice of someone who's specific to that realm, and better yet, getting the two professionals to talk to each other. So for those people out there watching who may need to seek the advice of a second professional, what would you tell them in terms of trying to get people to get onto the same page?
I'd say a huge part of competency is recognizing the limits of your competency. Ultimately, you would not expect a family physician to perform a brain surgery. Mm-hmm. And that's just known. It's just known. Mm-hmm. And yet, a lot of people want their advisor to be able to handle things that their advisor should not be able to handle. Mm-hmm. And it's almost a little scary when they say, hey, you know what, let's work together with your CPA, or let's work together with your attorney. I think people probably see huge bills, dollar mm-hmm. signs. But ultimately, there are times when that advice is going to save them multiples of what they spend on it.
Okay.
And a good advisor is going to recognize those times.
Okay. Excellent. I want to put up a website, and as we're putting this up, I reached out to you and said, of all the information out there, what do you think to be a good website? In the 30 seconds we have remaining, why did you pick this one?
Primarily because, well, number one, Thomson Reuters is a strong source, but number two, this particular page does a great job of breaking down into multiple categories. Who does it impact? Impacts on small business, impact on individuals, changes to the alternative minimum tax if you want to dive down into that. So this is one of the few summaries that has a hierarchical structure where you can almost start with a table of contents, read what's relevant to you, and be able to digest it.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here to share your time and expertise. Great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to our students behind the scenes, to all of you for watching. As we close, a look at Turner Park in Midtown Crossing, as seen through the lens of George Cruz Alvarez, a senior right here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/Consider This. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.